Hey everyone, Bruce Eckfeldt here. Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Make sure that you subscribe and turn on notifications so we can let you know when the next video is posted. You can also check us out at eckfeldt.com for more great content. With that, let's go check out the video.
You're listening to Scaling Up Services, where we speak with entrepreneurs, authors, business experts, and thought leaders to give you the knowledge and insights you need to scale your service-based business faster and easier. And now, here is your host, business coach Bruce Eckfeldt.
Welcome, everyone. This is Scaling Up Services. I'm Bruce Eckfeldt. I'm your host. And our guest today is Heather Willems. And Heather is a creative storyteller. We're going to find a little bit about the work that she's done as a visual strategist, as a graphic facilitator, as an entrepreneur herself. And I'm excited about this, being someone who originally was out of the creative field. I always have a certain soft spot for people who understand creativity, understand design thinking. Mm-hmm. So with that, Heather, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
So why don't we start with background? Because I know that you've had a lot of different kind of, you've worked with a lot of different companies. You've had a lot of experiences as a designer, as a creator, as a facilitator. Mm-hmm. How did you get into this? So let's do the background of how you got into this, and then we can explain in a little more detail what visual storytelling is and how you do it. What is the actual process?
Sure. I have a background as a visual artist. I actually went and got my master's degree in photography. From there, I ended up working as an educator and then eventually found my way into consulting. And the visual storytelling I actually discovered while being a waitress. Where all good careers
exactly. Well, let me ask this: Have you always been creative? I mean, were you the type of person who, 5 years old, was doing these amazing drawings and like at your core, visual and graphic in that sense very early, or was that something that developed over time?
Well, rumor has it apparently I was drawing before. When I was 2 years old, I was drawing. But, every parent says that. Yeah. But both of my parents are very creative. And I believe that I come from a long line of artists in different forms. Uh-huh. But my mother was, before graphic design, she was an illustrator. So she would draw the things. I'm bumbling over my words.
That's okay.
Both of my parents come from a creative field. My dad was an interior decorator. And then my mother did commercial art.
Got it. Genetically predisposed to being creative.
I preferred to draw pictures or write stories than play with toys. And I guess the story goes that I packed up all of my toys when I was 8 years old and proclaimed that I didn't need them anymore.
They should be given to a child who is in more need of these toys than I am.
Yeah. And my mom was just like, oh, sure. So she stored them down in the basement. But I never played with them again. I was really interested in drawing and writing stories. Yeah.
Did you always know that you were going to have a very kind of creative, visual, graphic career? Or was that a question at various points of upbringing and professional decision making?
You know what? I made it a mission that I would make my career out of art.
Yeah.
And the reason I was really actually motivated by my father, who found it to be so challenging to be a creative in business, that he really wanted me to go into business school. And I refused, like every 18-year-old daughter does. But yeah, I really made it my mission. I was kind of at the beginning, I was like, I'll show you, Dad, that I can make a living from art.
This was an act of defiance.
It really was at the beginning. It was an act of defiance. But then as I started doing it, I found that it was everywhere, especially when I was teaching. I taught at The Ohio State University. And my students would come in and say, I have to quit your class because my parents want me to take some real classes. And from that point, I really made it a mission not only to build my career around art, but then also be able to show other people that they could do the same thing.
Yeah, that's powerful. So how have you turned it into this profession? I mean, what were the stages you kind of went through in terms of figuring out how to make this, not only, a creative, kind of creatively satisfying, but also professionally successful?
Well, I think at first, as I mentioned, I started out as a photographer and I have a master's degree in photography. So at first I started doing editorial work and then started working in the commercial, working commercially, working for Target and Anderson Windows and Wolf, which is a kitchen appliance.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, sure.
So I took the photography and was working in the corporate world. And that was not satisfying to me because I didn't feel like I had, at that young age, I didn't feel like I had full creative control in that situation. But coming into, say, my 30s, and then even now today, the work that I enjoy doing really is coming from, one, trusting my creative instincts, and then two, answering a question that I don't have an answer to. And in this case, it's really like, what is the greater purpose? Like, what is our greater purpose as individuals? What is our greater purpose as individuals within an organization? What is the organization's greater purpose, and how do I align with that? So those are some of the questions that I started asking myself. And then from the business perspective, like, how do you make a business out of that? What I've found through my creative practice is if you can find the value in the process of answering that question, that's something that you can start to turn into a service business.
Yeah, I like it. Let's talk a little bit just about sort of the nature of this kind of visual thinking, or using some of the techniques that I've seen you use at, in some of the events that I've seen you at and stuff. I mean, I think that one of the kind of powerful things that I've seen in terms of people reacting to, the work that you do, and I think there's just a different part of your brain or something that starts to get engaged when you start sort of thinking with images and illustrations, when you start getting, out of the words and the language construct and seeing things in terms of visual and some relationships. But I guess what has been your experience, or how have you kind of developed that as a skill and then use that as a facilitation tool? Talk to me a little bit about that.
The first thing that comes to mind when talking about visual note-taking and then bringing that practice into the business world as a visual strategist, I can kind of speak to it in two different ways. One is the individual who is, as you said, thinking differently while they're listening, and then as a facilitator who's guiding a conversation. Yeah. When it's being used, when I take visual notes, and the visual note taking is, I'm basically doing three things. I'm listening to the conversation. Yep. I'm picking up the key ideas, the main points that are being made. Yep. And then drawing images to support that message. And I think the value of it as an individual to do this. So whether you're in your own business meeting or you're just taking notes at home and having it as a creative practice, is that it increases your ability to absorb information and increases understanding. And I believe that the primary reason is because you are listening in a different way, as you mentioned. We just listened to Eric Maddock speak. Just the other night at EO. Yeah. And one of the things that struck me when he was speaking is that he said, we listen 5 times faster. We listen 5 times faster than people speake.
So interesting. Yeah.
We are only hearing 20% of the information that's being given to us. We are filling in 80% of our capacity with distractions. And so what the visual note-taking does is it consumes some of that distraction area. So we're kinetically connecting to the content and listening for that next point that's going to be made. Yeah. So while other people are looking at their phones or, noticing the food that's waiting for them after the speaker's done talking, you're still connected to the content by taking the visual notes. Yeah.
So you mentioned something that I hadn't quite thought of or appreciated, that you use it as a listening tool for yourself. How, and can anyone do this, or is there? You're highly talented. I've seen your work, and it's visually stunning, and it has a very developed kind of graphical style or capability. For someone who is not trained in illustration and in graphical composition and these things, can they use this to listen better?
Absolutely. It doesn't have to do anything with how beautiful the images are. It's about communicating the ideas. Yeah. So it's all about the content.
Even whatever level of drawing skill you have, just using non-word, non-kind of language-based capturing of the stuff that you're hearing will activate a different kind of part of your brain or allow you to listen in a different way.
Absolutely. So it's, even if you're just doodling while you're on a phone call or something with, just nonsensical information, it helps to not only increase your listening skills, but it also increases the memory of the content that you are engaged with.
Fascinating. That's a great takeaway for folks. So in terms of then, so that was kind of using it as a listening tool. Talk to me about as a facilitation tool. So listening tool is a little bit of that conversation is going on or that presentation is being made over here and I'm kind of capturing it in this way. I'm listening to it. How do you use it as a tool to help actually facilitate the process, direct the conversation or direct the energy of the group? And how does that work?
There are a lot of different techniques that you can use. One way that I like to use the visual strategy with teams is to create a template when people are coming into the space. So it might be something as simple as a giant Venn diagram drawn up on a flip chart that indicates that something's going to happen in that space. Or it could be a visual story that's telling the entire journey of a customer from discovery to the point of purchase. So drawing up the content that normally would be shown in a PowerPoint and having that up in the space when people walk into the room, that it's an indicator that this is going to be a different type of meeting. Another benefit to having the content captured in a visual way and having it up in the space throughout the entire meeting is that you can refer back to something that happened an hour prior, and it's not hidden in a flip chart. It's not, crumpled up on the floor, has Post-it notes falling off of it. Yeah. It's just a very clean visual template that's capturing the conversation that's happening in the space. And we were talking a little bit more about the act of listening and how that's improved through the visual note-taking. Yeah. It's also increases the engagement of the participants in how they listen and participate in the meeting. Because remember we were talking about how there's so many distractions that we're experiencing when we're actually listening to something? Yeah. One of them is that, people are worried about, is their idea being heard? Another fear or concern that people might have is, does their idea have the same weight as their boss that's in the room? Is there a hierarchy of information and idea that are happening? And then I think a third bonus of and then another thing that might be concerning to them is like, what am I going to say next? Am I going, how you're perceived in the space and in the room? So one of the benefits of having a visual strategist or a facilitator in the room is that when I'm in the space, I'm listening with unbiased ears. What I'm interested in is capturing the information, creating a story that people can connect to and see the problem from a different perspective. And then once all of those ideas are up in an even playing field, seeing where two ideas might come together and merge to create something that's much more robust than the original problem was asking.
Yeah, I like this idea that, you kind of create this map. It creates a map of the conversation, allows you to quickly go back to other points in the conversation visually, more quickly. And then, these kind of connections. Because a conversation or, I guess a verbal dialogue, is a very linear, ephemeral thing, so, the moment it passes, it's very difficult to kind of recapture. This kind of gives you a map and a tool set to be able to draw connections and see how these things, fit together or potentially could be put together in new ways. So I like that idea. So that's good. So I think that gives people a sense of sort of the way in which you apply this approach in terms of helping, either engage folks, capture deeper levels of meaning, and then, using it as a map from a facilitation process. In terms of, what you use it for, I know that you've been a big kind of proponent of culture and purpose and, helping companies really define their values and what their mission is. Talk to us about how you can use this process to help companies get to those questions, because I think those are really hard questions. As a coach and someone who works with companies to kind of try to get to this stuff a lot, oftentimes you're just looking at kind of deer in the headlights when you start bringing this stuff up. How does this create a new sort of different, more effective angle to get to those questions?
You're right. This stuff is so hard. Yeah. It's like really diving into the core of who you are and then forming the organization. Yeah. Around that. When I think about this work of like identifying the the purpose and the vision, the mission, and the values of the company, I call it the first work, because it's really the foundation of what everything is built upon. In your organization, and you're talking about cultures, I believe that the culture is strengthened by having a very clear, articulated vision and mission for where you're going, and also getting the input from all of your team members into that process, I think is very important. Because one, they feel like their voices are heard. So that's, as a leader, you're going to be able to see their perspective, whether you agree with it or not. You're going to start to have some understanding of where they're coming from, which will create this empathy. Therefore, you're developing this trust. And then to have an image of it drawn up, it's something that everybody can start to align to. And I'm always fascinated how people really have deep ownership in these images that I help them create. Yeah. And when I started out doing this process, they'd come up and be like, oh, there's my drawing. And I was like, hey, I just drew that. That's not my drawing. And like, last I checked, I made that.
Funny.
But people
good. Yeah, good. Good they feel ownership of it. Yeah.
They have. And that's one of the things, like what I was talking about, when you find the value in the questions that you're asking and you start talking about that, that's when you start to be able to build up a business in that way. But anyway, it creates this ownership that people really have around the mission, vision, and the values. So right now I'm focusing on seminars called Clarity Through Creativity.
Yeah,
and
tell me about it.
Just coming up, I'm about to do a workshop tomorrow, actually. And what I'm doing is I'm leading a group of individuals within the organization to ultimately articulate and define their own purpose.
So their individual purpose, not the company's purpose, but their
not the company's purpose, the individual purpose of like why they get it. It's their, Simon Sinek is, why they get up in the morning, why they come into work. And I was talking to the owner of this agency, and he's like, what if everybody decides that that their purpose is aligned? And, that's really important information to know. Like
sooner rather than later.
Yeah. Your team isn't aligned with your purpose. Yeah. But ultimately, what my goal is with the session is to help them to tap into their bigger why, or their purpose, their motto, their personal mission, and then tie it to the organizations.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That makes sense.
I'm so excited because it's really great to see how people start to make decisions that are empowering themselves. By doing it in a group setting, they're able to learn what their colleagues need to achieve their purpose, and they're able to take actions to help them and support them. And then ultimately together, they can find ways to support the company's purpose.
Yeah. I'm curious, how are you setting up the workshop? Are you giving everyone poster board and colored Sharpies and having them draw? Or like what's the process that you use to help them use this technique to actually get to those underlying learnings?
Yeah, well, I mentioned the templates earlier about using the templates to guide and facilitate the conversation. I've developed a single page PDF that's the digital file. I've created a single page template that guides people through this process. And ultimately the idea is that people will be able to download the PDF and do some of this really hard work at home. Yeah. But for myself personally, I love guiding people through it. So it takes them through a journey. It's really identifying their strengths, uncovering their motivation, what drives them, articulating the beliefs that they have, and then how those beliefs are tied to their values. And then ultimately, like, what is the commitment they want to make to change, commitment to change that they want to make, and who are they serving? Yeah. So it's an intense process.
I can imagine. There's probably a lot of emotions that bubble up to the surface on this process. Intentionally. I mean, I think that's we are emotional creatures, and I think the more you can tap into that to figure out what your purpose is, that's going to drive motivation, inspiration on a day-to-day basis.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah. So if people want to find out more about you and the work that you're doing, the Clarity Through Creativity workshops, the seminars, the work that you're doing there, what's the best way to get a hold of you and find out more information?
My website is heatherwillems.com.
Awesome. I will make sure that's in the show notes. This has been great. Any other, I guess maybe one last question or takeaway from the group. If if someone is interested in kind of, applying some of these techniques, what's the best way to kind of play around with it to listen better, to use it in sort of their next meeting, or what would you suggest people do to experiment with the kind of the visual side of this?
Well, there's a lot of information out on the internet where there's communities like the Sketchnote Army is an awesome community that everybody's doing sketchnotes and sharing them. The Sketchnote workbook is a really great book where people can start to practice those skills, and it breaks it down into a very simple step-by-step process. And then also I co-wrote a book called Draw Your Big Idea. It gives an introduction to visual note-taking, but it really is chock full of, I think there's over 100 different templates that you can use and apply to, it's targeted towards launching a new endeavor. So whether it's a building or a new website, or a new business. Or
yeah, you do a new building, why not? We've got architects on this program.
Yeah, why not? You want to build a building? Draw Your Big Idea.
I like it. All right, so I'll put the link to the book in the show notes as well, so people can know all that. This has been great. I appreciate your time. Always a fun conversation with kind of a fellow creative, and I really had fun.
Yeah, me too. Thank you.
You've been listening to Scaling Up Services with business coach Bruce Eckfeldt. To find a full list of podcast episodes, download the tools and worksheets, and access other great content, visit the website at scalingupservices.com. And don't forget to sign up for the free newsletter at scalingupservices.com/newsletter.